So everybody's mad that the Department of Education is getting dismantled. But let's keep it real. Y'all just realizing the whole educational system was designed to make workers and not bosses. The Rockefeller education system was built to train employees, not entrepreneurs. That's why they had us memorizing the Pythagorean theorem instead of learning how to build credit or how to start a business. Okay, class, instead of financial literacy or investing, we're going to spend the next 2 weeks talking about the War of 1812, because that's super useful when you're trying to buy a house. John Rockefeller literally said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." And guess what the school system did? They delivered just that. Y'all must have forgot. They had us sitting in rows, raising our hands for permission, training us to be obedient employees and not leaders. But now that the system is falling apart, y'all suddenly care. Where was the energy when they were feeding kids propaganda instead of real life skills? They literally got y'all kids more worried about pronouns and feelings. Cut the light on! Is y'all waking up or is y'all still in dreamland?
Hello guys, and welcome to the J Report. In today's video, we are going to talk about President Trump's plan to shut down the Department of Education. Yep, you heard that right. If this goes through, it could change education in America forever. But is this a good thing or a bad thing? Let's have the discussion. And if this is the kind of content that you enjoy, please consider subscribing, liking and sharing this video so that it may be able to reach a wider audience. And without further ado, guys, let's go straight into this video. And so first, I'll play you some clips of reactions of people following this announcement, and then I'll come back with my commentary.
So it was announced that the Department of Education is on the chopping block to be shut down by the Trump administration. And some people are confused and upset as to what that means. So let's talk about it. When the Department of Education first started in 1979, it had three main goals: administer federal funding for education, collect and analyze data on schools and students, and enforce federal education laws that relate to civil rights and equal access. Notice that nothing I listed mentioned giving them power to set educational standards. That's something that's left up to the states, right? Not quite. The Department of Education requires that all schools and states that accept federal funding have to follow certain guidelines and standards, which essentially gives them control over what's being taught in schools and basically puts all states and schools on a one-size-fits-all education model. This means that students in places like Malibu, California and rural Alabama are forced to follow the same curriculum and teaching methods despite obvious economic and cultural differences that impact how students learn. Now, this wouldn't be so bad if the reading and math scores in the US were on the rise, but it's the complete opposite. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, US reading and math scores have dropped to the lowest level in decades. And the sad part, this isn't even a new trend. Based on the most recent assessment, reading scores have reached a historic low, with 33% of eighth graders reading below the lowest level. For fourth graders, the number is even higher, with 40% of fourth graders reading below the lowest level. That's the highest percentage in roughly 20 years. And what makes this worse is that the US spends more money on education than almost every other country in the world by far. So this model clearly does not work, and it's not something that you can just throw money at to fix. The other big issue is college loan and grant funding. College has become completely unaffordable, and the current student loan debt in America is about 1.7 trillion. What most people fail to mention is that the reason that college is so expensive is because of the Department of Education. Why wouldn't a school continue to raise its prices if they know that the Department of Education is going to give students loans for any amount of money and they're not tied to the performance of the student nor the performance of the school? It's free money. Removing the Department of Education will force colleges to lower tuition overnight because no students will be able to afford it otherwise, and those schools will go out of business. There are several colleges right now that don't accept federal funding, and their tuitions are way lower, plus their students experience way fewer issues when it comes to student debt when they graduate. There are also already states that have stepped up and started to offer student loans that are more affordable than what the federal government offers. So yes, we have real world examples of what this could look like without the Department of Education, and they seem to be effective.
So let me get this straight. We are upset about the possible dismantling of the Department of Education. when we've done nothing but complain about the Department of Education and the crap that they are teaching our children, y'all do realize that the public education system was set up to create factory workers. Repetitive, punctuality, menial task, busy work, things like that. That is what the education system was set up to teach. It is set up to keep you ignorant. Now, as a 10th grade high school dropout, I can actually say I'm not formally educated. I've had a little bit of college, and that's about it. But with a teenager who is struggling to find any enjoyment in school right now, and I mean any enjoyment as far as like the schoolwork itself goes, I think the education system is a sham. I think it needs to be revised in the worst way possible. And it needs to be able to like fit the needs of multiple people, because no one's going to learn the same and no one's going to excel the same. So just like we take time to help people that have different learning abilities, we need to do that with each person, because that's what we are. We're different and we're unique. And so stop complaining about a Department of Education that has done absolutely nothing but fail you.
If the Department of Education shuts down, it could dramatically affect college students. I was just talking to my college students this week. They had no idea that financial aid, college loans could all be affected depending on how it turns out.
Now, I know after watching these videos, you have opinions which I'd love to hear. So please go down in the comment section and let's keep the discussion going. We can see that there are mixed reactions, both positive and negative. And so first, let's talk about how shutting down the Department of Education will positively impact America. So number one, there will be more local control. You see, right now, the federal government makes a lot of big education decisions that affect every state. But here's the thing, every state is different. What works for New York City may not work in a small town in Alabama. If education is left to states and local communities, they can create policies that actually fit their students' needs. I mean, no more one size fits all rules. With more local control, states and school districts will have the power to decide on curriculum, testing, and teaching methods without federal interference. This means that states will adapt their education systems to better align with their economies, cultures, and unique challenges. For example, a state with a strong agriculture industry could focus more on agricultural education, while a state with a booming tech sector could emphasize STEM programs. So this also means that school boards and parents could have a greater say in what their children are taught. If parents feel a certain curriculum doesn't align with their values, they would have more direct influence over changes. Number two, there'll be less bureaucracy, leading to more efficiency. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that government agencies love paperwork? I mean, teachers and school administrators spend so much time jumping through federal hoops just to get funding or approval for certain programs. By cutting out the federal middleman, schools could focus more on teaching and less on paperwork. This could mean that faster decision making, hence quicker adoption of new teaching methods, and more flexibilities for schools to focus on what truly matters, which is the education of students. Another advantage is that I believe colleges will be forced to lower tuition. You see, one of the biggest criticism of higher education today is just very high tuition costs. A major reason colleges charge such high costs is because they know that students can take out federal loans to cover the costs. But imagine if the Department of Education is eliminated, federal student loans might disappear, meaning fewer students can afford to pay these expensive colleges. This could force these colleges to either lower their tuition or two, shut down. But many private universities, which depend on students taking out large loans, might have to cut costs, offer more scholarship, or reduce unnecessary expenses to remain open. But on the flip side, this could make it harder for low income students to afford colleges, potentially decreasing the number of people pursuing higher education. Number four, we might have lower federal spending or even lower taxes. Because the Department of Education's budget right now is over $80 billion per year. If it's shut down, That's a lot of money saved. Some believe that this could reduce federal taxes or redirect money to things like healthcare, infrastructure, or national security. Less spending means more saving, right? However, states will then have to take on the financial burden of funding their education system. While some states might handle this well, others could struggle, leading to funding gaps. Without federal interference, states could expand school choices options like charter schools, private schools, homeschooling, and voucher programs, and without worrying about federal regulations. This means that there'll be more flexibility for both parents and students. With shutting down of the Department of Education, there'll also be less political influence in education. Education has become super political in recent years. Topics like gender identity, diversity programs, and curriculum choices have caused a lot of debate. Some people argue that by eliminating this department, schools could focus more on learning and less on political agendas.
Let me tell you something. There's never been a time where the people who ban books are the good guys. There's never been a time where the people who attack education are on the right side of history. What this billionaire and the current administration are doing lays the groundwork for authoritarianism. This is not fear-mongering. There's precedent throughout history to tell us exactly what's happening right now. Attacking education makes it easier to indoctrinate a populace. They want to make it harder for your kids to go to school, harder for you to pursue education. They want to dissolve the DOE in its entirety. We're all in support of reforming and improving it, but dissolving it in its entirety with no goal or method of trying to make it better is going to make it harder for you to go to school. For your kids to get an education, it's going to make it harder for public schools to stay afloat and get the funding that they need. They are attacking education to keep you indoctrinated.
Okay, so the idea of dismantling the Department of Education would somehow fix the system is misguided at best and harmful at worst, because suggesting that students will still get lunch and special education services without federal oversight shows a misunderstanding of how much support our most vulnerable students receive. Because the Department of Education ensures that students in poverty, students with disabilities, and students from marginalized communities have access to resources and protections that they deserve. And without the Department of Education, Title I funding, which is critical for schools with low-income students, would be slashed, leaving millions of students without resources they need to succeed. Special education services would be moved to other agencies with far less accountability, putting education and the well-being of 7.5 million students at risk. So this isn't about hope for a better system. It's about stripping resources from those who need them most. And to be honest, dismissing these issues shows a lack of concern for students most impacted by these cuts.
But anything that has positive impact also must have a bad side. And so let's get into the other side of the argument. What possibly could go wrong if we shut down the Department of Education? Well, number one, there will be loss of federal funding for schools. A huge part of public school funding comes from the federal government. Programs like Title I for low-income students and IDEA for special education rely on this money. If the Department of Education disappears, states might struggle to make up for those lost funds. That could mean budget cuts, fewer resources, and even teacher layoffs. This could hit low-income and special needs students the hardest, as wealthier districts might still thrive while struggling communities fall further behind. Without federal intervention, schools in poorer states might not even have the means to provide updated textbooks, technology, or even essential services. Now, another negative impact that I believe will be felt with this department shutting down is that there'll be chaos in regards to student loans and financial aid. If you've ever taken out a Pell Grant or a federal student loan, guess who manages those? Yep, the Department of Education. And without it, where would that responsibility go? To the Treasury? Private lenders? Would financial aid become harder to get? Students and families could face a lot of uncertainty, which is the last thing that they need, especially students coming from poorer families. Also, just imagine the inequality that would be felt in education across states. One big reason for having federal education standards is to keep things consistent. Without them, states could set widely different educational policies. That means that a student in California might get a completely different education than a student in Mississippi. This could widen the gap between wealthier and poorer areas even further. And lastly, I believe that there's a potential for higher state taxes. Remember how we said that shutting down the Department of Education could save federal money? Well, that money still has to come from somewhere. If states have to take over education funding, they might raise state taxes to cover the cost. So while you might pay less in federal taxes, you might end up paying more locally. All right? So this is my final thought. As of now, it's a wait game to see whether this is a good or a bad thing. I have given you both pros and cons so that you can make an informed opinion. But otherwise, I would also love to hear your opinions down in the comment section. So please go down there and let's keep the discussion going. Otherwise, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I also have another video on Trump's plan to take over Gaza. So if you would like such kind of content, click up here and please enjoy. Also, please consider subscribing for more content like this. And until the next time, guys, the Joy Report out.